Welcome to the 7th day of this lecture series, and we still have 4 lectures to go. And today the theme is the ontological problems of complex phenomena, the concept of emergence. So I'm excited because the discipline ontology, which is the core discipline in philosophy, and emergence primarily conceived as an ontological problem, and how Professor Fausto Fresopi is going to explain that in this framework of ontology. And I think this last 4 lectures, which will conclude our lecture series, and are very important, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So, to you.
So, thank you, Babu, for the introduction. So, I prepared slides for 2 days today. So, I will implement tonight in consideration of the fact how we will progress on the matter, because the matter is the core matter, the core stuff or the core topic of philosophy, if you take it as a sort of traditional sense, that is, and we'll prepare also our approach to problematize or to put into question the societal policy-making problems and issues of complex phenomena itself. Why? Because anyway, people arrive to fix what something is when they have either implicit or no implicit, that is explicit ontological patterns. So let's just not underestimate ontology in the sense of a very, very theoretical stuff or very, very theoretical discipline in philosophy, but it's needed at least when at the ground you will know what it is or what something is. From this point of view, we develop, or the Western philosophy at least, developed just at the beginning ontology at the core of all philosophical approaches. Ontology and first philosophy were originally also at the core of Aristotelian project of unity of science, but we will approach that on the run. So, starting from the epistemic perspective of a multi-perspectivism or a multifocal perspectivism, the 7th, 8th lecture, will focus on the ontological problems of complex phenomena, and in particular to 3 problems, one being that of ontological relativity or plurality of ontology involved in complex systems. The second being that of the coexistence of multiple ontology in a complex system, such as an ecosystem or a society, and so on and so on. And the third being that of emergence. In the 8th lecture, in the 7th lecture, today's lecture, we will provide the general frame to these 3 problems by showing how complex phenomena pose radical problem to epistemology, specifically in relation to aboutness of our approach to a word subspecie complexitatis. What is aboutness? Rarely speaking, the question arising, what we are talking about, okay, at the end of the day. So, starting from ontology is often very, very risky, because you have the clear idea that we talk about something, and then you switch the epistemical feature that pose problem to this aboutness itself, as we will see, in particular with complex phenomena. Today we will discuss these and debates in acquisition of the 6th lecture. In the 7th lecture we will dig deep in from a structural point of view the idea of an invariance, structural ontological invariance of complex phenomena. Not by chance, one of the author of this book, James Ladiman, is the promoter of a very, very strong view in ontology, on epistemological ontology, named ontic structural realism. Okay? So I skip. To do this, we will move from an ontological to a meta-ontological consideration. For this reason, I put all the topics in 2 lectures and only one, just in one, because it would be overwhelming. Always keeping within the debate of contemporary philosophy, analytic and phenomenological. The purpose of elaborating this theoretical acquisition is to arrive at a general but consistent epistemic ontological scheme for reading and understanding the complexity of certain phenomena and their multi-dimensionality, as we mentioned many times along our lecture. From this point of view, the question will be raised as to whether the convergence of multiple theoretical and epistemic approaches can identify, or let us identify, not only epistemically, something such a complex phenomenon, and whether such a meta-theoretical and meta-ontological conception can be taken as guiding thread for reading global phenomena. So the problem is, as I already mentioned, that ontology or ontological debate is not so superfluous as we can presume. Okay? We can take ontological problems, and in this case meta-ontological problems, as superfluous or not too necessary, merely speculative, because we get also and we use also in our everyday life, as well in our technical approaches, ontological frames that are implicit working in our identification of things. Okay? So, for example, you go on your social networks and you find the logo and the denomination meta. If I ask, for example, what is meta, okay, you cannot identify it. That's the problem raised to ontology and to informational science of such new kind of something forms. Okay? If I ask you what is an ecosystem, okay, you define blah 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 blah, but then you have not a clear idea what an ecosystem can be, because you're still working on ontological contexts given by previous ontological form of knowledge, either the ontology of the thing or an ontology of epistemic object, but you are not clear what it's about. Okay? Or you can also make a patchwork of these things, what we do today with all these new stuffs that come to us. We patch just a bit, but anyway, there is not clear, and when it is not clear, we encounter problem. And in this case, we encounter problem of identification. So let's take, I don't put in the slide, but I can put by integrating the slides tomorrow or tonight, ongoing from our debate today. Let's take just in consideration what we said yesterday about nihilism, about complex system. And please concentrate yourself on the word nihilism. So I don't think that there is a very clear explained word, because nihilism is something other, is not that at the end of the day. We can also speak about deny of complex system or negationism about complex system. But if the authors use the word nihilism, that is, nihilism come from nihil. And nil in Latin means nothing. So deny a complex system as an entity or as something, it means to say this what you're speaking about is nothing, does not exist. And as, for example, in the very interesting debate yesterday about xenophobia, or about negation equals complex system, I don't think and never will think that they are right. But the people negating climate change as something, denying the characteristic of existence or individuation, what often go hand in hand, or phenomena as xenophobia, are at the ground, get at the ground reason. I'm not saying that get at the ground good reason, okay? But they are grounded on arguments, false argument, badly enhanced argument, but anyway. And let's just, I go slow because then we become technical, more tomorrow we become even a bit more technical, and it's better to go slowly because it's a sort of core point of the lecture, and if you will, what you cannot find, as we will mention, in other introductory books, coming from a long run of research during 20 years and so on, okay? Even more. The most negative view of complexity is simply that there is no, and please concentrate, there is no such things, or such thing. I will make it clear, nothing that is so such thing as a complexity in general, or as a complex system in particular, a well-defined complex system in particular, does not exist. There is nothing that allows us to affirm or can state with sufficiently grounded identification what or where is a complex system. Okay? So nihilism, even if I don't agree with the denomination, is very catching, okay? Shows that it's a question of being, question of existence, there is question of individuation. Similarly, it could be argued that complex system is a vague and ambiguous term that covers a variety of things, and complexity science is just a collection of techniques and methods that does not have a domain of its own. Here we have, this is the way to read analytically a book, if you have been instructed for. We have two denominations that we can jump to our eyes, okay? One thing is vague ambiguity that covers a variety. We have also spoken about varieties. Varieties of space, varieties of regional ontologies or epistemic domain, and this is the fact. Variety of things, and that complexity science is just a collection of technique and methods, okay? So both things are related because the variety of things correspond to the variety of technique and methods. Okay? I go very, very slowly. Okay? But you have to understand that such approaches or such presentations is more theoretically laden of philosophical element as you can presume at first sight. And in fact, people negating complex system on these arguments can be perceived to be right. I'm not saying that they are right, but can be perceived to be that. Why? Because we have a multiplicity or varieties of things. Let's think to the bird flock, or let's think to an ecosystem. We will then approach more closely the heterogeneity of the ecosystems, okay, or multicultural society, and so on and so on. Values, religions, ethnics, social groups, worker class, and so on and so on. Okay, so it's true. Identify a society, a multi-ethnic society, as complex. Encounter the risk that try to throw a sort of ray light or the cone of light on things that are heterogeneous among themselves. And then this heterogeneity must be taken into account from methods and techniques that are different. Okay? For example, one thing can be covered from historical sociology or historical ethnography. One thing can be covered by microeconomy and so on and so on. For ecosystem, the same things. Atmosphere is to be taken into account from a discipline, biotic system by many disciplines because population of viruses or population of bacteria will be taken into account for a branch of biology. Humans be taken into account for a branch of biology. In the humans root themselves as also sociological things, and so on and so on. Okay, so people could be appearing to be right, and at the first sight, let's be radical, they are right. Okay, if you proceed with the ontological patterns and the meta-theoretical patterns that we get, they are right. Techniques and methods that not have a domain of its own. Every technique and method have its own domain, but they have not one domain talking together. Or they have a sort of patchwork of domain, but you know, patchwork is not a very good argument in argumentation in claiming the existence of something. So it's like you take a box, you put a pen, you put the bottle, or just a bit drink, and then you put your socks, and then, I don't know, your pet, and then you say it's one thing. No, someone can say that's not one thing. It's a heterogeneous collection of things. Okay, you can take something and there still remain a collection of things minus one, but it's not a thing in itself. Why? Because they think with the grammar of think. Okay. In this way of thinking, which we can call nihilism or deny or negationism, there are very different ways that different sciences combine to study complicated systems, and complex systems are just complicated things. For example, tissue, just complicated things. That you may remark here the reduction that will be approach after between complication and complexity. We study with interdisciplinary science using computers. And anything over and above that is, at best, a convenient label, and please remark the idea of label, because the idea of labeling things is the first, or the indicating things, and labeling things with words. I refers me to what implicitly is to what we approach after the first essays of Quine, Ontological Relativity, and other essays, 1960. Speaking of object, I suggest to read the book, because it's to read firstly from a logical point of view, and then Quine, Ontological Relativity. A convenient labeling, naming, for an emerging synthesis in the sense discussed in chapter 1, and at worst, for the purposes of grant application, journal publication, and book sales. On this kind of views, it seems advisable to stop using the terms complexity and complex system as if they were well-defined scientific concepts. This is very, very good argumentation. Okay? So, people studying about years about complex system identify, sorry. What's happened? Just move, okay. So identify the core problem, okay? And the core problem will be not approached in this book, because it's sort of epistemical introduction. But the problem persists because it's as an ontological problem. And ontology lies at the core, not only, I repeat, of our first philosophy, of our Huygens speculative approaches, but also to our life. We stop to be afraid from things by naming it, okay? Even for feelings, okay? I cannot name my feeling, what I feel. I cannot express what I feel. That gives stress, gives pain, and so on, and so on. So the elementary relationship between naming and living, or naming and living by orienting himself or herself into named and labeled object is essential. I would say is primordial, even if it is wrong. Okay? Without name, there is no judgment on such thing, for example. There is no statement on such thing. Everything is confused. So, and when to the name does not correspond some of concrete unity, okay? This orientation becomes greater and greater, okay? Not by chance, in this fair tale of, I like most, theogonical and cosmogonical tale from India and old Greeks, but in the fair tale of the biblical cosmogony, God give to Adam, okay, the power to name things. And in the middle of the modern age was a very, very huge debate in linguistics and in logics, even pursuing in modern linguistics, okay, in contemporary linguistics, about the fact that things can have a sort of rigid designator, okay, if name belongs to the essence of thing or not, or just conventional. So there is not something outside philosophy and outside ontology, okay? For example, we quoted Kripke, and Kripke is someone that's who searched in this way about in a very, very huge book, very short but huge, Naming and Necessity. Okay? something is a rigid designator when it's applicable to think in every possible world. It's a very rough presentation from which starts even the contemporary and model metaphysics and ontology, from which Kripke itself take distance, okay, because it's just a semantical, logical inquiry. But, you know, this act that we notice with your children or the newly born children, and with your brother in your case, that we point an object and we profere a sound that we will associate that object is essential. And is essential not by chance, because we will meet, I will not make a lesson on history of contemporary philosophy, the same problem and inscrutability of reference by Willard for Norman Quine. So I take the thing simple, but it is, we have a name for something. For this, following to this name, we develop a sort of general shape, even gestaltical shape. Then we have objects, or we have concept, and we differentiate the concept following the variance or invariance. Okay, that is, if you will, how it proceed also our genetical identification, or roughly speaking, our genetical capacity to identify things and phenomena in the world. So, if we don't have a name for something, okay, or even if we have a name for something that cannot follow a sort of elementary primordial gesture of identification by indexation, okay? Ball, 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 cat, cat, you know, the child, ball, ball, cat, cat, then play, and so on and so on. We have a very, very huge problem to conceive the unity of the thing. So, from the first point of view, I will just switch among the slides, but it's just introductory things. We named, or idealize, let's idealize the process. We name, we develop pattern by which our indication, our indexical gesture identifies just a general shape that can variate and so on and so on. And then we proceed to definition of the content of this name, okay? If that is not the case, we have a problem. And this is the same problem for complex system. It's not so simply, but anyway, the scientists say that's complex, okay? And the people say, what is complex? The complexity of climate change exists. Where is the complexity of climate change? Where is the complexity of a multi-ethnical integration? Okay, I don't see the complexity of such thing as, I expressly use, I don't see such thing as a multicultural integration. I see people coming from one country, menacing the economy of resident people, that's just all. I don't see such as a multicultural integration. Okay? Does not exist. Indicate to me where it is. You know? So people use, even if sophistically, use patterns that we all share in order to stabilize the fluctuation of our phenomenal world. Okay? So, for this reason, ontology is at the core. Not because we follow Aristotle that said, we come back to the first introductory lecture, that there is a sort of always searched science, named first philosophy, that is the questioning about being as being. So by Aristotle it was more theological, being as being, and theology, this is the first form of being, but anyway. The epistemic, I will quote roughly because it's just a survey of philosophy history. When Aristotle say in metaphysics, there is a science, okay, zeitumene, that is always, I zeitumene, that is always search, this is a science without name. Okay, an anonymous science, and that for a science for which we have to get the name. And this science asks about something as something. Something because precisely is something. Okay? And this science is the first philosophy. It's not, we put that at the core of our philosophical reflection or systematic reflection, not because we follow Aristotle, because Aristotle follows, and even Plato followed, an intrinsic necessity of the thing. In relation to the yesterday play between thing and truth on one side and illusion and falsehood on the other side, Plato developed the first original schema that then will be used. Is not an opinion of mine, is an opinion, is also not an opinion analysis of Plotin, Neoplatonist in the late antiquity, on which Aristotle developed his metaphysical science. This is not metaphysical science, there is many debate what is the metaphysics of Aristotle, and so on, but you can also have just an overview. It is an intrinsic necessity because among the proliferation of the sciences, we need to have a general pattern, what the science is about, and give possibly this is the forms of metaphysics, able to give ultimately foundation to every forms of science by such answer what is something. Okay? For this reason, ontology and metaphysics has been considered first philosophy, because Aristotle make a very, very clear distinction between first philosophy, that is the most general philosophy, okay, determining the thing, something as something on and the deuterae epistemae, the second science. This not mean this is not, they are not important, determining region, very different region of appearance or of the realm. Psychology for mind, physics for stars and planets and bodies, physiology or biology for animals, ethics for values, and so on and so on. Okay? So let's skip to denomination. This is that corresponds to question. And please remind our yesterday discussion, even the question what is being as an history, as a problem, before to begin to answer to it. Okay? So we name ontology or theory of object, what by Meinung will name Gegenstandstheorie, what is such something, on what is what there is. I take a taxonomy given, this is not the only, we can also invert the things, but it's more pertinent. What is what there is, and metaphysics, what is there. That is to bring the characterization of something as something to clear criteria of clear. Logic, sufficiently clear criteria of individuation. If I say that something is something, A, B, C, so on and so on, it does exist or not, why I can prove that it exists or not, Okay? And today and tomorrow we will precisely approach these two questions, these two branches in relation to complexity. Okay? What is such thing or such something that we name complex or complex systems? Because you can remember we reduced this general, just a bit superstitious idea that complexity is everywhere to the definition, epistemic definition of complex systems, and then with metaphysical problem to identification. If we have sufficiently clear criteria, or if we can become sufficiently clear criteria to identify a complex system. Okay? And then you can also recover what we say in the previous lectures. That is, for the present, we have, for this reason we have to do with nihilisms, we have just patterns that cannot let identify and cannot let answer ultimately the question. Okay? We have, because we move, allow me this superficial expression, we use either the grammar of the things coming from the Aristotelian scholastics in paradigm, or the grammar of the object coming from the modern paradigm of science implemented with ontology. Briefly, excluding Hegel from Descartes till the beginning of the 20th century. Okay? And even pursuing in the 20th century, for example, let's consider Carnap. Okay? So, we already sketched that instead to have a unique perspective of reductionistic or the reductive perspective of consideration of phenomena, complexity as general property of a system needs to adopt a multi-perspectivism or a multifocal perspectivism. That is, we have multi-perspectivism is many perspectives that work separated, and a multifocal perspectivism is a perspectivism wherein we have two or three foci. For us, it's more than two foci is not possible to put an image. But anyway, if you have, for example, biology in an ecosystem, biology and atmospheric conditions, okay, and soil condition, we can have three different foci of our consideration. Okay, it's just already beyond our capacity of visualization, but then we can, in a way, conceive what it is. But the problem is we still have a multi-perspective, and from this we can learn too much. We could still have a multi-perspectival approach, even in the modern science, philosophy, and ontology, that of the greatest genius like Newton of the modern age is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Okay, there is a very huge book in German, Leibniz System ins multiperspektivistischen Universum, that say, according to statements from Leibniz, even in the monadology, that every being can perceive, or must necessarily perceive, the world from different perspectives. Okay? But the problem is that multi-perspectivism is linked to the ontology of substance. So it's a sort of hybrid or genial mix between Aristotelian ontology and Cartesian ontology. That is, at the end of the day, the monad perceiving the world from different perspectives is always a thing. a concretion of monads, but the leading monads are is a thing. Okay, so multi-perspectivism can encounter many problems if applied to this case, but is a sort of breakthrough case of complex system. Why? Because now we are forced as singular, that is, as intelligence taking stance in the horizon of experience, to have many perspectives for the same object. So it's like to turn around the object, distantiate, variate the perspective, and fusion all those perspectives in one optics that we don't have. And let's consider also just a part of the notes on complexity, or the epistemic essential features of complex systems that we have, with which we have to deal. There is many elements in interaction. They have constraints. There is holonomic and non-holonomic. That is, there are constraints that pertains at one time all the elements of the system, and constraints that pertain non-holonomic, that is not concerning the whole, all the elements. In the example of the box, I have constraints that pertains all things that they put in the box, and any constraints that pertain just two objects, two elements. It sounds not so good for our identification, okay, if we proceed in this mereological way. But the things are an intrinsically global coherence, wherein, in the example, we don't have an intrinsic global coherence. I put whatever I want, and the intrinsically global coherence is to be contained in the box, but it's not a global coherence. It's just an occasional coherence. I can put that on the table. They get the intrinsic coherence due to the fact of lying on the table, but it's not a sufficient argument in order to affirm a coherence. Okay? A modularity and a hierarchy, so different hierarchical levels interacting themselves. This is also difficult to think in order to individuate something, okay? Because we can also split the modules or the hierarchical layers into ontologies and consider the ontologies, layers at the ground, as the constituents, or layer as the top, as the leading forces, but we cannot consider a thing with more hierarchies together. For example, the module and the hierarchy for the modern world as module and hierarchy pertaining to different things, but not to one thing at the same time. The one thing that it can be hierarchical and modular for the modern metaphysics and also for the ancient metaphysics is the word itself. The problem is that we have a sort of something, not the word itself, that is modular and hierarchical. And this is our brain or our mind begins to break or to don't work properly. Multi-scale and multi-order functional organization. That is, I have not a simple matrix. Sorry, I repeated the line. We have now a simple matrix in order to identify the thing. What is also difficult because if I follow my indication, okay, there is a context and or generally speaking, epistemically a matrix that gives me the indication where point the captors, okay? If I have to search, for example, quantum phenomena on photons and so on, there are intricated and so on, but I can set the captors in order to identify where is the case, where not is the case, but anyway, one spectrum of caption is needed. multi-specificity and model specificity and model plurality, model centeredness, multi-scale as repeated by multi-scale and multi-order functional organization, and reconsider that from an ontological point of view. So if we put simply that notion that we unfold epistemically into into a discourse oriented to determine what is at the end of the day about, breaks our system of reasoning. Either we speak without identification, nihilism, or we identify without a clear frame because our clear frame is coming from another way of identifying, or simply speaking of. That is, we are in a situation of ontological plurality, but in concretion. That is, a concrete ontological plurality that works very well together, but is an ontological plurality that we have not just one thing belonging to an ontology, one thing belonging to the other ontology, working per se very well. We have sort of melting of this ontological region in one concrete, or presumably one concrete something, not thing, of course, but something. And the situation of ontological plurality, once considered related to a concrete something, is the paradox. Okay? Because someone can say without such long introduction that they speak about everything and nothing. Okay? Like a sort of salad fruits. Salad fruit is not an ontological kind. Okay? Tastes very good. I'm fanatic of salad fruits. But anyway, there is not an ontological kind. Okay? Salad fruit is just the result of slicing fruits, putting together in a container. Let's fermentate in the best case with cognac or so on. But anyway, there is not a natural kind. I can vary the salad fruits, vary the fruits, for example, from India to Morocco and so on, but it's not a natural kind. It is not something which nature, or more technical, which ontological tenure or ontological status is inscribed in the inventory of the world. Let's remind inventory of the world. There is many contemporary analytic ontology and metaphysics inside, just because contemporary ontology and metaphysics don't give back to question ontology and metaphysics formally and by problems in the last century. Okay? So, I name things that come from the ontological debate of analytical philosophy, and apply to a problem that breaks also the discourse of analytical ontology and metaphysics. But anyway, that is the result. That is, we put in friction problems coming from the outer world to our conceptual patterns that are mostly developed. So the problem is that ontological relativity and ontological plurality in concretion are not the same thing. We can handle with ontological relativity, we still cannot handle with ontological plurality in concretion. So that is related to a single something. Okay? Because if ontological plurality or ontological manifolds are not related to a single individuum, the problem of ontological plurality traduces itself to the problem of ontological relativity, for which we have a solution, or general mapping, anyway. So, ontological relativity, you can find many introductions to the to philosophy of Wheeler, von Neumann, Quine, but you can also, in order to contextualize, go to the well-known Stanford Encyclopedia for Philosophy and ontological relativity, even by presentation. I don't know, someone knows, someone did already read ontological relativity? Okay, it's very, very well written and very, very well presented. I will just give you a presentation. It represents the first indeterminacy of reference. That is, beyond the assurance that when we point out something, we name that with certainty, and then we can unfold the properties and so on and so on. Beyond this assurance, we lies in a sort of indeterminacy of reference. Okay? So there is some sentences can be translated in more than other way. Given that the sentences are about something, it's matter of a sort of not transparency of aboutness of things. Okay? And let me finish, and then I will give you examples. And the various versions differ in the reference that they attribute to parts of the sentence, but not in the overall net importance that they attribute to the sentence as a whole. Quine uses the terms ontological relativity, inscrutability of reference, as well as indeterminacy of reference. Okay? And Quine gives a very good example, very simple, but it's very useful. Beyond the fact that it's been very useful to me, but anyway, very useful. An ethnograph discovered or found a very unknown population in the lost island, I don't know, of Point Nemo, or in Atlantic or Indian Ocean, and so on, with fully another kind of language. And if you will, we unfold in the last days just another epistemic language. So it's not different the case. We go to the island of the complex and we discover another language, the complexity science, would they say, and we discover another language. Strange attractors, many-dimensional things, holism against particularism, indeterminacy, probabilistic things. Okay. Let's consider the ethnograph. The ethnograph goes and there is a rabbit running in a field. Okay? And the indigenous say by indexing that gavagai. Okay? Let's the gavagai. Complex is our gavagai today, and our task is as to say huger as for the gavagai, but it's the same problem. The indigenous says gavagai. What means gavagai? If I don't know the frame of using sentences, of relating to object, and so on, can means chase it or eat it, can mean rabbit, can mean white rabbit, or the name for white rabbit, can name or can identify why or rabbit run, can identify how speed it runs, can identify how fine it is, and so on, you know? If you will to decipher new forms of reference to phenomena, in a new language, okay, you have to translate or to force Anyway, because it's an heterograph, this must be decipher the language, okay? Force speech X to a grammar that is not intrinsic to this language, and then you have not access to the really pointed reference of the expression, okay? Because I cannot, after a full translation or exam of the language, know what is meant by this act pointing Gavagai. Okay? What is Gavagai about? What is the aboutness of something spoken in another strange language? I have to decipher that by projection, or what Quine named proxy function. Some philosophers have sought to distinguish this doctrine, but in later work, Quine made it clear that he uses these terms simply a different name for the same thing. See, Rickert and Quine, to use an example which has become famous, a given sentence might be translated that is Gavagai, we don't even know if it is a sentence. Okay? It can be a noun, it can be a pronoun, and so on. It can be just an expression like abracadabra, without meaning or without ideality, in order to spring to usher, and so on and so on. There is a rabbit, or rabbitude is manifesting itself there, like in the animistic societies, or there's in undetached rabbit parts, or in other ways limited only by one's ingenuity. All that is needed is what Quine calls a proxy function, which maps, and mapping was central in the yesterday debate. It will be central today, tomorrow, and for societal and policy-making importance of complexity. Mapping, which maps each object onto another object, and each predicate onto one which is true of a given proxy object, if and only if the original predicate is true of the original object. That is a bit complex or a bit complicated, but you can understand the meaning of the thing. We have to make a map between a form of expression or experience, because I said yesterday, the limits and the feature of my language are the limits and the feature of my word, and another language. Okay? For terms referring to physical object, what is more important for us, if you will, it suggests we can take the proxy function to map each object onto its space-time complement. What it is what we name it as metric. Okay? There is one metric and there is another metric. For example, there is a geometry, there is another geometry. If, for example, I will map quantum phenomena into the language of extended mesoscopic things, okay, I have a sort of impossibility to reach the same things, because on the one way we have two different geometries, sort of complementarity of determination, they not convert to another. So what the problem arises not by chance after quantum mechanics, okay? Not only, but by quantum mechanics. This is translate, we already experienced, and this is the usefulness to have given a bit of history and epistemology of science. If we will translate Cartesian or Galilean dynamics, transformation groups, and so on, into the language of the grammar and grammar of Aristotelian ontology, we don't reach the same things. We lost so much information, or we put it too much information, that it cannot be handled with the same clarity. If we will translate and conceive, okay, quantum phenomena, just quantum phenomena, let's say, into Newton mechanics, we can use proxy functions, but the result is not the same because we lost the object in itself. We lost what it's about and the novelty that it poses. Okay? There is a very, very interesting thing. I don't know in many languages, but I'm interested in myself. There is a very, very famous, the very, very famous formula for quantum mechanics is the Dirac formula. Okay? That speaks about Dirac C or the Planck dimensions and the dimension beyond the Planck wall and so on. There's entanglement and so on and so on. For every particle, there is sort of formula saying that for every particle beyond the Planck wall can exist a sort of opposite or same particle, electron, positron, and so on and so on. And it be translated romantically as the things that once two particles meet together, when two things meet together, their life, when two persons meet together, their life will be influenced once for all till the whole life. Okay, there is sort of this romantic interpretation of the Dirac formula that has nothing to do with the real content of the Dirac formula. Okay, the formula of life. But let's take the things on the aboutness. If I translate the Dirac formula into this romantic statement, I lost the aboutness of the objectivity. I don't think about objectivity. I lost even objectivity, but I lost the thing itself, or the something itself. What I'm talking about. Because the proxy function enabled me to expand sort of related to a very, very defined field of reference to the life of person, instead of the fact that there is not the case. By enlarging the scope of the formula, what the formula is about, I lost the real information of the formula itself. Okay? So we can have proxy functions, but it's not said that proxy function still give me the access to the same thing. And for physics, for example, I have to have a sort of grammar of translation between metrics in order to maintain sort of information about this something where we are speaking about. It's the same thing, please do not generalize. It's the same thing about context of speech. Okay? In some languages, cursing is a sort of art of expression or even blasphemy. Please believe me. And in other languages are very offensive, or in other contexts are very offensive things about against authority, religion, and so on and so on. If I take the same expression away from the context in which it's formulated, okay, lost the information that the expression gives me. So the idea of Quine is a more clear and more defined version of that thing. That is, expression naming things that we talk about aboutness, okay, are related to context, domains, and metrics, in particular for science, okay? I cannot, for example, dynamics in quantum gravity, dynamics belonging to the things modeling as appearing beyond the quantum world. This is I guess, microscopic and cosmology related to the same things, but do not have an access to the mesoscopic, because for the mesoscopic, other laws are valid. The change to the translation of singular terms is the something what I'm speaking about. The change to the translation of singular terms and the change to the translation of predicates cancel out, leaving the overall significance of the sentence unchanged. The claim of indeterminacy of reference is not in any way a claim about what goes on in the language user's mind. There is not what I think, is not a clash among opinion. Okay. Is something related to the aboutness of reference. Okay? The problem is that the ontological relativity that we can easily handle by being attentive to change of context, metrics in science, ontology in science, pose problem where it is related to a singular itself, to a concrete, like a complex system. What we are speaking about since 8 days. Okay? Here the ontological relativity is intrinsic to the something considered as complex systems. Okay? We have a concretion between, so we have we can say that if by the ontological relativity we can switch between one language to the other language with proxy function by measuring the loss of information and the change in relation to the aboutness of our sentences, in the ontological plurality, concretion of plurality, concrete ontological plurality represented by the concept system, this possibility disappear because we are referring to the same thing, okay, or to the same pretended something what we are speaking about. So how do rule here the proxy functionalism? Because we have proxy functionalism. We are multiple ontologies. We can translate. But what happens when we translate? We translate in relation to the same about. It's just contradictory because in the first case of ontological relativity, we have two different aboutness. We have the same aboutness. So how can work the proxy functionalism? How we can consider an ontological plurality in something, not of something, of the reference to something. Quine calls proxy function, which maps each object onto another object and each predicate onto one, which is true of a given proxy object, if and only if the original predicate is true of the original object. For terms referring to physical objects, it suggests we can take the proxy function to map each other object onto its space-time complement. That is important because this space-time complements refers to the multidimensionality of spaces that we mentioned in the early lectures. Okay? But let's consider that all that space-time complements are intertwined. That is the complexity, tossed together. All these aboutness are intertwined. For this reason nihilism arises. Because if many aboutness are intertwined, I'm speaking about everything and nothing. Or the objection is, I'm speaking about everything and nothing. the something still remain in complexism, still remains something, while having parts and modules and space-time complements, pertaining or belonging to different regional ontologies. What can be inhabited by sentences of a certain type. So if I talk about quantum mechanics, okay, if I'm talking about thermodynamics, okay, yeah, I have a regional ontology, and in this, by this regional ontology, I can structure my sentences in order to fix the aboutness, not the objectivity. Objectivity is just another kind of stuff. The aboutness. So I know where I'm talking about. Okay? Scientists know very well where they are talking about because they fixed the reference to the something. So they, or if not fix, they secure the semantic, secure at most the semantic oscillation of terms that they are using in order to talk about something. This is sort not of intrinsically fixed reference, is sort of a void of too large oscillation in semantics, reference, use of predicates, attribution, and so on, and so on. This about, but and now we have the intertwined plurality of different ontologies. They entails in a concretion that entails the intertwining of many space-time complements or many space-time metrics. They entertain the intertwining between many different ontologies at all. An ecosystem of a multicultural society is neither exclusive X or Y or Z or M or N, but is all that together. Then we can also approach now in order to understand what is the difference or what is the elementary difference between formal and material or regional ontology, a distinction coming from Husserl. Formal ontology is descriptive and involves analytic a priori judgment, while regional ontologies involve synthetic a priori judgments. In most general sense, formal ontology is concerned with characterizes the simple something or the something as something, okay? The something in its general features identifiable in every kind of occurrence of the something, okay? Husserl adds the province of the region, of a formal ontology is said to be the formal region of the object as conceived generally. Die allgemeine Region des Gegenstands überhaupt. Okay? So when we identify something where we are talking about, we use a grammar, generally identified as formal ontology. There is a sort of little split between the grammar we use, this is a sort of formal apophantics, and the formal ontology. Why terms are just variables because we don't have colors, chairs, computers, and so on, but just elements that the grammar can relate together. And we have a regional ontology, okay? By which there are chairs, tables, I don't know, curtains, and so on, or they are man, animal, and so on, or etc., etc. That now we anticipate on the tomorrow lectures, but let me just simply oversimplify the thing. If we will talking about something, we use in general two sets of elements, formal ontological and regional ontological. Or if you translate in analytic philosophy, syntactical and semantical, but it's quite not the same, but it's very similar. So you can model and how the computer model the aboutness on two dimensions. The first dimension, is that of regional ontological predicates or regional ontological elements simply, and the formal ontological elements. Okay? So this is two-dimensional. If we will apply or proxy functions, okay, there is a general oversimplified model about aboutness. We don't talk about objectivity. We talk just about objectivity. This is aboutness of something. We have to translate the R01 and R02, and that is the proxy function, okay? And then we will have a sort of result of this aboutness because the formal ontology or the general grammar remains invariant. So it's, there is not too different. It is not too hard to understand how a translation occurs into terms or concrete predicates that a language or a semantic use in order to express something. I can have something different, but anyway, the proxy function is possible. Let's put aside for the moment the space-time complement, because for the space-time complement the things becomes more difficult. Okay? But anyway, when ontological relativity is spread among different regions, and those different regions are not tossed together, we don't have too much difficulty in order to think even with a sort of oscillation of indeterminacy of reference to find what we're talking about. Okay? We are not for sure talking about the same things in an ontological, metaphysical point of view, but we can measure the change. Okay? If you express yourself in another language, okay, you know what you can express and what you lose when you express, for example, in French or in German, or when you express people married for people from other countries experience it almost every day. There is a sort of loss of information, societal, cultural, and so on and so on. But anyway, you can identify the aboutness, how the Google Translator works without artificial intelligence. But anyway, translation works in that way. You transfer, and this is even easier in the case of the same grammar of languages, to translate just the semantical terms, okay? When not in a European language, we have other difficulties, but anyway, you can map it. And you can also notice the variation of the reference, the variation of the aboutness, without losing an aboutness as such. When all that is tossed together, it's a pair that is more difficult. If you, it seemed to me that you know the name of the rose of Umberto Eco. So it's like to have to do with Salvatore, to which Guillaume von Ockham talks, and the scholar also talks. What language speaks that monk? And the Meister answer, everyone and no one. Okay, because there is a concretion, a sort of indistincted, or that seems to be indistincted conclusion about form of reference, semantics or regional ontology, and consequently aboutness. Okay? If we consider, for example, the case of complex adaptive systems that we mentioned yesterday, financial market or economies as complex adaptive system, we can see that the complex adaptive beings are capable of developing new operative structure through experience and operation. That is, in relation to what we said in previous days, to let emerge new forms of kinds. That is, new forms of aboutness, because if something is a new form of something, okay, we have no grammar in order to express it. Either we take it as an n+1 aspect of this general aboutness, or we reduce it by loss of information, like for the languages we spoken about. You can just understand in which way we move to map how emergence and reduction, ontologically speaking, can be handled in such way. The problem is that the intellectual and philosophical movement of system thinking failed till today to acknowledge before the emergence of the problem of emergence. Okay, there is a very, very nice paper, the emergence or the re-emergence of emergence in a philosophical way. Failed to acknowledge the deeply rooted relationship between ontological question and practical epistemical problems of complexity. That is, even in this book, after mention the nihilism, we close. In the other books, there is no question, ontological questions. Okay? So, we sketch, because it's already difficult to sketch. You can also notice in the Handbook of Philosophy of Complex System. Beautiful book, a beautiful book, as all the handbook in this series, not just this book. Okay, beautiful, 700 pages, a very, very comprehensive mapping of complexity science, spoken philosophically. What is missing is ontology. Because on one side, the time has not come. As we do, without an epistemic approach, you cannot ask right ontological questions, as Aristotle did, as Descartes did, as Newton did, not just Fausto Fresopi, okay? The time has not come. Philosophy, as the birds of Minerva, of Athena, come always later, always after. This is when the night comes, okay? But on the other way, because it's relatively puzzling and disturbing. For this reason, the task, the general task, if you will, of the understanding of a complex world is not just to make an ontology of complexity, okay? But to notice how the ontological problems of complexity let us reach another standpoint on ontology and on metaphysics, as from historical but also from theoretical point of view. As for quantum mechanics, as for Galileo, as for even Plato and Aristotle, huge problems coming from the world. Let us reach the consciousness to change our basic grammar to conceive, or to redefine a grammar to consider the world. Okay? It's not something internal to ontology. I'm very, very skeptical. We will see it tomorrow about very, very quick defined ontologies of complexity. I'm very skeptical at all. But anyway, the problem is most philosophical for rationality itself than local for the epistemologies of complexity being in need of an ontological complement. You know? It's a problem for rationality because we have to do with aboutnesses or the forms of aboutness that exceed our unborn, natural, and very useful form to refers to phenomena in order to identify it simply. With a framework, no matter, maybe with two different semantics, but in a simple way with a space-time complement, an sort of symbolic indexing gesture, we can give a sort of general framework, what is about, where it exists, where it's to search it, where is to study it, and so on and so on. And for this reason, historically speaking, the specularity within the situation, the first situation of birth of ontology by Plato is very, very illuminating. Okay? We are almost in the same situation where the modern world in which we live has become as the archaic word. And then we have to reach a new grammar to understand the new word. We must recognize complexity as a breaking element in the ontological and epistemological horizon of modern age. Okay? Prepared, of course, from many elements, not only this time from the side of science or epistemology, but also from the side of ontology and metaphysics. Let's just mention Edmund Husserl or Alexis Meinong or Process on Metaphysics of Alfred North Whitehead on the other side. Or let's just mention the radical debate that brings to this ontological relativity between Quine and Carnap. Okay? Let's mention Martin Heidegger. Okay? At a certain point. Okay? So there is not just, there is a convergence between history of theoretical philosophy on one side and history and epistemology, theory and history and theory of science on the other side. This is that breaking point. Okay? The breaking point that is spreaded in our culture because we have no frame at all in order to understand what complex systems are. At the end of the day, when we're at the end of the day or groundly, we need that we have to reach a sure ontological frame in order to reconsider the epistemological issues or our existential issues and give or include all those things in a general frame of coherence, of stability, and so on and so on. There's the internal, almost unconscious need for ontology. Okay? Implicit as well as explicit. When it's matter of implicit ontology, it's matter of experience, it's matter of use without knowing what we use. If it's matter of science, we have to bring the implicit ontology to an explicitation and handle the problem of rising from this explicitation or explicit making to a strong redefinition. So let's formulate some principle that then we can approach tomorrow with more details. Let's formulate at first a methodological principle that you can find in a paper I've uploaded as relatively young and immature of 2014. Then tomorrow we'll give the complement, not speculative, but the formal complement of this handling. Complexity or ontological complexity or complexity from an ontological point of view consists of a manifestation whose richness exceeds the treatment of information of a singular frame, regional ontology, or, of course, regional ontology plus the formal ontology that we must suppose as invariant, because instead we cannot have proxy functions. Okay? Exceed the treatment means, as we see, that it exceeds also the richness or the phenomenal richness of a single formal ontology. If you take just simply an ecosystem by its ground articulation between abiotic and biotic systems, it's very rarely, but we cannot consider that system ruled by one elements belonging to one ontology, because the abiotic is the negation of the biotic, then they belong to two different macro ontologies. Then if we specify, we find 10 or 11 regional ontology in concretion in the same aboutness. Then complexity is a non-ontological property in the sense that there is non-ontological single property. That lets arise many speculative problems. How something that getting a non-ontological single property has no ontological property at all. And there is, that pertains other matters, but there is very, very interesting to ask that question, because how an ontology can admit something heterogeneous, ontologically heterogeneous in itself. Ontology comes from the pure and simple object. I will make note the story, but people say ontology has begun with Aristotle. More and more studies says that one thing is the theory of being as being formulated by Aristotle. One thing is ontology coming from the Scotism, that is 13th, 14th century, then passing through a very huge debate about analogy of being and about Suarez, and coming to Descartes in a very, very definite way. Okay? So ontology is not something that exists, always been the same. We have also difficulty in order to identify ontology. We sort of more, we can name ontology with a lack of historical definition. The theory of being as being formulated by, we'll say, Aristotle, I will say Parmenides and Plato, becoming to us, but it's sort of lack of historical precision. What we can call ontology by text, is something arising from the Scotism. And for then bringing to Suarez, and from Suarez bringing to this idea of objectum purum et simplex elaborated by modern science. If the old and noble name of ontology can be reduced to a simple analytic of understanding, as we read in the Critique of Pure Reason, is possible, is because these analytics make the things so simple as the ontology pretend to do. And then we don't need ontology, we just need the analytic of understanding. But what is our problem concerning is that ontology works very well for simple objects. Things an epistemological one in the modern sense that we outlined in the previous days. Complexity then is a non-ontological single property in the sense of its being partially outside of the system of formal regional determination of such something. That is not outside of the system of every regional form of determination, but of the coupling between one regional ontology or one semantic number of predicates, the semantic number of names and predicates, and the general grammar of, or syntax of formal ontology. Okay? So it's outside the system because the system is structured to be double Xed. An ontology is without space-time complement, a theory of the object, a Gegenstands theory, works very well with a formal ontology and a regional ontology. Okay? And what, by anticipating what we'll say tomorrow, reductionism is all that. We take all the dimension of the complex, we erase the concretion of ontological plurality, and we bring everything to the basic constituents. It's rational, if you will. Okay? Reductionism is that. I'm not so emotionally opposite to reductionism, because reductionism is a very rational practice. Okay? So we use the ontological tool we have in order to simplify. No, it's legitimate anyway. It's better than superstition because, like Kivong Jim, like Evon Kim, sorry, ask many problems, even to emergence of problems about complexity and so on and so on. We'll see it tomorrow. Complexity is non-ontological in the sense that is not an intrinsic property of object, that is natural kind, we will use the terms tomorrow, nor the epistemic feature of a subject matter of a single epistemic approach. What we will mention in the nihilism paragraph, okay? It's very clear and comes from Descartes. It's a disciplinarization of science. It's very clear, very useful, and very successful. Okay, I will not deny that. A theory, as said yesterday, adds a field of application. Even Aristotle developed that, but Descartes disciplinarized it. Okay? A theory as a field of application, a domain of application, an ontology of object on which what it has to say is relevant from epistemic point of view. Okay? If we think a sort of meta-theoretical complex, that is something needing a connex between many theories, we have very, very problems to identify what about is speaking, or what the domain of object. If we deny complexity, is because we stay at the situation by which every theory has its field of application, has its ontology, and it is impossible to consider complexity in the terms of a single coupling between a theory and an element. This, if you will, is good common sense. But it's not say that common sense helps us to explore no new horizon. Common sense lets us to stay quiet at home. And while you're rising to India, you can rest to the Europe and teach to your colleagues and friends the same language, the same things, the same cultural thing, the same. I would say, believe in good common sense, but not blindly. Oh, sorry. If complexity as a non-ontological single property breaks the fabric of ontology itself, then we must accept that it is impossible for any ontological system to provide a complete determination of manifestation, because they are complex systems. The case of complex phenomena, okay, shows that that an ontological system cannot be holistic, general and out through determined reality. Why there is something that is complex phenomena, or the complex phenomenon is epsilon or z, that breaks the fabric of this simple determination. Okay? The complexity of manifestation exceeds the domain of traditional ontology, in the sense that the traditional means of ontological determination must accept a surplus, a residual rate of phenomenality that is non-comprehensible and non-compressible by a unique system of course, ontological determination. I would, if you will, stop here, if you allow me, or I go just a bit.
Maybe a bit more.
Eh? Okay. And let's recover what we say just more in details, okay, by this schema. We can conceive I already anticipated, but you can, I apologize. We can conceive the formal ontology as a syntactic system of rules, as a class of rules that provides the structure of apophantic determination of object as object in their formal structure. That is something, or T in the same, that is without color or without particular ontological nature. In the formal ontologies, there are no hippogriffs, there are no dragons, there are no chairs, there are no tables, there are no computers. There are just x, epsilon predicates with function. If you will, we can also very easily translate to Phrygian notations. Similarly, we can also define regional material ontologies. For this reason, I spoke the first time in plural, in singular, and the second time in plural, as semantic systems, providing to present the representative content of certain classes of beings, each time integrated to the formal structure of objects. For example, the term relation, okay? And if you will study, or if you will redefine your idea of formal ontology and material ontology, study either or the categories of Aristotle, or the interpretation and categories of Aristotle, and then the core books of metaphysics, Zeta and following, or study from this point of view the Critique of Pure Reason. Right? Because the Critique of Pure Reason is a sort of search independently from presupposition of the formal ontology to give itself the form of a regional ontology of the object. It's just a bit raw presentation, but anyway, okay? So to apply itself, the problem of the core problem of analytic of principle, and even the last point of analytic of concept, is the Anwendungsproblem, the problem of application. But the problem still remains the same, if you will. We have a space-time complements, there are the transcendental aesthetics. We have formal predicates, okay? A table of judgment. They must become a sort of pictures or frames for concrete objects. But it's always the same. There is a semantic and there is a syntax, or there is a formal ontology or a formal apophantic entailing pure object, and there is a regional ontology. We can also define regional materials ontology as semantic system providing to present the representative content of certain classes of being, each time integrated to the formal structure object in general, or Gegenstand überhaupt. If a certain manifestation A is supposed to be determinable by the class of formal predicates FO, F1, F2, F3, Fn, and by certain class of empirical or regional predicates, R1, R2, R3, Rn. In the complex phenomena, there is at least a property, Ax, that can be determined by the Cartesian articulation between formal ontology and regional ontology. This sort of breaking point or a negative condition. Let's talk about biotic and abiotic elements in an ecosystem, just by elemental feature. From a meta-theoretical perspective, it can be assumed that formal ontology only provides to the form of a theory, whereas the regional ontology implements this empty form with a concrete framework of that theory. Formal ontology and regional material ontology in Husserl's phenomenological language, grammar and ideology in Quine's, but be integrated with another fundamental element, one that gives ontology its capacity to present the word image or objective world, as is the idea of instantiation. Okay? The criteria of individuation. I think as something, Gegenstand, that is not only an object in general, but is a concrete object that is my aboutness. And then I have, in order to have a theory, like said yesterday in the play between theory, model, and model validation, and model and empirical issue, I must give me procedures or forms of giveness that let instantiate this aboutness in the phenomenal world. Okay? So, in general, an ontology as theory of object is a Cartesian articulation between formal ontology and regional ontology. In order to have a theory, okay, that is, in order to have an ontology, I have to implement another dimension, that is the dimension of parameters or space-time complements of individuation. Okay? Let's stop, and tomorrow we will apply more in detail that to the scandal of complexity, in order to arrive to model these things, in order to think the concrete, complex ontological plurality of complex systems. Thank you. Such complexity stuffs inside. There is just sort of a survey of handling with contemporary ontology. Yes.
My question is to do this speculative realism. Bunch of people who like accuse Kant of like correlations and how he subjects everything to thought. They draw inspiration from Heidegger and how Heidegger contemplates reality in terms of Dasein. So my question would be, after Heidegger, if we try to come up with an ontology of like this ontology of complexity, will we not not going back to an ontology.
Okay. No. The answer is clear. It's no. Because the ontology, let's take in account many factors. The first is the approach of Heidegger's approach to ontotheology, die ontologische Verfassung der Metaphysik, and the all very, very detailed analysis that come from, especially in the French domain. I refer with my professors and masters like Jean-Luc Marion or Jean-François Courtine, especially. I don't see how such idea of ontology can bring to an ontotheology, because we have to introduce God. God.
Aristotelian ontology, being of beings. That is also a common concept.
No, for this reason, because let me just articulate the being of all beings. In any case, is not necessarily an ontotheology. It can be considered an ontotheology if we consider such being as God, or with special care the nature of the substance of Spinoza, but it's not the case here, because we don't provide, and it will be a matter of tomorrow, we do not provide sort of any idea of the being of all beings. It's just in order to describe locally the ontological intertwining between ontology in species of phenomena. So there is I will try to reach a general grammar, but it's not an holistic grammar. There is no commitment on the whole of the world and about something that can be considered the entire totality of all beings, because what misses to us in order to claim it is the idea of completeness of logic, on the idea after Kant that we can reach by determination the whole as such. No, in any case, it will be a sort of return to ontotheology, nor the return to a sort of holistic metaphysics. In any case, it's not metaphysics. As we will see tomorrow, it's not metaphysics at all, because metaphysics entails certain steps that we will approach tomorrow in order to determine once for all what exists or not. Okay? For the moment, and we will also see it more in detail tomorrow, we are at the step of a general grammar of determination of something exceeding singularities that take place in just one ontological domain. So the result for the moment, but even tomorrow, it's matter of a descriptive meta-ontology, following the idea of mapping given by Quine, and then given also by Husserl by its project of analysis and exploration of regional ontology and so on. There is no metaphysics at all. It moves in a radical metaphysical neutrality. And the problem, that I said in my introduction, maybe the most revolutionary approach, maybe the most revolutionary issues to approaching complexity from ontological point of view, and to have constructed the framework in order to approach it properly, is that we put in question the need of a metaphysics as such. For example, by coming back to Saul Kripke and this self-distantiating from modal ontology or modal metaphysics as by Lewis, we can say that contemporary, or the forms of contemporary ontology in analytical domain goes hand in hand with metaphysics. And this sort of renewal of metaphysics in analytical philosophy, because it's matter of singularities, of individuation, or the clear statement of individuation, even if this individuation can be obtained, it's not obtained, deduced is not really deduced, sketched, starting from the entireness of all possible world. That is another sort of metaphysics. This is not ontological, but it can happen because such metaphysics focus on singularities, or focus on more than singularities, focuses on individuals. And then the ultimate goal of such metaphysics must be, or that can be, but must be necessarily, the ultimate inventory of the world. Was not the case for such descriptive meta-ontological approach. Absolutely not the case. For realism and speculative realism, Graham Manzi, I have many perplexities concerning the fact that I so deeply studied the speculative, or the notion of speculative in the history of philosophy, that to use that idea speculative in just this sense seems to me just a play of language, or that I don't understand what is the need today for a speculative realism. So I understand the needs of realism. I understand. Okay. But this sort of speculative realism arising from not epistemical issues, not epistemical analysis, like also the other forms of realism, I follow the debate. There is sort of inflational ball, but then I don't think that can fulfill the task. So we can accept, but I don't really understand what is matter of. What is the philosophical task and the apport to rationality? Okay? Yeah.
So this is not related to this. Basically, I wanted to ask a question about the application of complex systems within, as a way to understand political systems, public administration.
That is for tomorrow, for after tomorrow, the last two lectures. So you can wait. But anyway, it rejoined our yesterday discussion. It's matter of policy making and orientation. In the last workshop I participated, a metaphysician say, but it's just a map. So it's not just a map. At first sight, we have to know of what the map is the map of. And precisely for policy making, for management, for education, a map is often more useful and more insightful, as give majestic frescoes of the structure of the world or elementary structure of the world without sufficient definition. Okay, that's the approach in the background. That is, the rationality serves a sort of development of humanity in order to build something new, and a map serves to this purpose. So, not by chance, I repeat what I said yesterday, complexity of system thinking has been taught in high management schools since the 90s in the United States, and then it spread also in Europe and maybe in India. The problem is, what can philosophy do in this movement of, or this spreading of complexity awareness? Is to structure, is to give structure. Even if we don't have, we cannot constitutively have, I demonstrated very, very carefully the impossibility of a fundamental ontology lying at the ground, as well as metaphysics and ontology in the sense of individuals, as well as from Heideggerian point of view. Maybe it's too articulated, too formalized in order to explain in this context. Instead, to give fundamental or speculative, and I'm a partisan of speculative thinking in another way, speculative word version, okay, or speculative word view. According to Kant, a philosophy that determines the domain of competence of the philosophical form of knowledge can be insightful and can be accord to the need of enlightenment that we had more and more. Okay? So, for example, for realism, okay, there is many forms of realism. The debate realism, for example, is not Graham Amann, as is Marcus Gabriel, as is Jocelyn Benoit or Maurizio Ferrari. There's many forms of realism. For Marcus Gabriel and for Amann is more speculative, but for example, if we had to choose, I will take the Marcus Gabriel version of field of sense. There is unstructured, there is no logic, as we will see tomorrow, that lets us bring for a field of sense to another, because we need proxy function, languages, and so on and so on. This is a model. But anyway, it's more open descriptive as a speculative realism. That I don't...
Even speculative realism is divided. So
yeah.
Quentin Melissu says something else.
Yeah, I know Quentin Melissu. No, let's take. It is a very, very erudite man, a very, very passionate teacher, nice person. But when I read Après la finitude, I wonder to me what we will reach with. So, the necessity of contingency. This is after 100 years of model logic, we still talk in terms of a simple three predicate model logic, and then we deduce that one is a mild realist, then it is not everyone can do what they want, but it is not necessarily that form of speculative thinking that we need, just in order to appetize the thing. All those people take the speculative just for one side of the coin of the speculative. Okay, the idea that the speculative is a sort of view from nowhere by which we can encompass the world with a single thesis, with a single book, or with elementary, even articulated, very refined thesis, is what the people criticize about philosophy. Okay? But it's not the speculative as such. Speculative is an standing mirroring with the horizon of phenomena and constructing structure that go with a possible metathesis that brings them to a possible paideia or a possible new forms of education. Okay? There is not the taking stance outside the world in order to encompass it. Speculative. There's one form of the speculative taken by Augustine, idea of prospicere de specula. This is looking for a watchtower. But speculum is also mirroring, So those maximal approach that are not so long worked as detailed as Hegel's speculative thinking or the Schelling, seems to me pertinent because as a Greek scholar, but I wonder how such issues can contribute to a new project of rationality. That's all. Then we can go into detail, but so is question? Yes.
I just want to ask, since you mentioned Gegenstand's theory and Alexis Meinong.
Yeah.
So, can you please explicate a bit on Meinong and whether he would, fit into this conception of complexity? In the sense, he was, I think, one of the first to question our, whole, this four-urteil, Sugunstendes.
Which two questions?
Sorry?
Yeah.
As in Meinong was one who actually asked us to kind of question our preferences towards the real, right? Towards the Wirkliches. So, in that sense, complexity as a conception that looks more at nodes, then hierarchies, and then possibilities of emergences. Can you explicate a bit of Meinong's understanding of Gegenstand to this idea?
Yeah, this is, of course, you asked by knowing already what it is, that there is Meinong understanding of Gegenstand is taking stance from a Brentanian point of view. That's the intentional stance of the object as intended, okay? But what is salient here is the first distinction, what no many people underlines by Meinong between bestehen, subsist, and existieren is being instantiated, and the remarks that makes just after in the Gegenstand theory. That's the form of other forms of bestehen. There's this sort of meta-ontology, because it's meta-ontology. Meta-ontology in the form precisely I adopted this meta-ontology in the forms of other Gegenstandstheorien, is useful for no discoveries. So I will not remain to Meinong, by which there is a sort of distribution of ontology. I explicitate just a bit because the Meinongian meta-ontology, since Meinong made many steps forwards, there is no such of distribution of ontology, this Bestehensform, die in a way subsist alternative one to another. The gesture is to take stance from this distributive meta-ontology that we can also retranslate in the language of ontological relativity, but then to bring it to a sort of intertwining. This is what happens when vielen Bestehungsformen vermischen aufeinander. And what happens, what we can say about the existence of these things or ontological monster that we encounter from the point of view of epistemic practice every day in our university, laboratory, interdisciplinary groups, and so on and so on. Of course, the meta-ontological opening I already suggest and I will explore tomorrow is Meinongian Husserlian, what they say, because also Husserl adopt the same thing. When Husserl received the Gegenstand theory, it's my theory. Husserl was too bit oriented to itself. But anyway, this opening of meta-ontology, this is a sort of looks at ontologies, not necessarily containing aboutness form to be individuated. It's the radical enlargement of the scope of ontology, and in my view does not bring to a sort of metaphysics, what is useful for Meinung. Okay? But it's what is very dangerous for Meinung is we have one form of existieren. There's many forms of bestehen, one form of existieren. The problem is how it happens when we enlarge the scope of existieren and then we articulate to this strange form of articulation of ontology. We are still in the description, so we are still in a descriptive meta-ontology. But we implement it with a sort of constructive grammar. So we must be able to build model for intertwined disparate ontologies in order to let individuate in a very certain form that we will be outlined tomorrow. Things, something's forms corresponding to this structure, they are we descriptively unfold. But you're right, this is the meta-ontology. So we have two occurrences of meta-ontology. One is by Heidegger metaphysical principle of logic in the appendix to paragraph 11, where I ended that, but the paper is in French. This is meta-ontology is me-ontology. Let's go in the sense of plurality of ontology, in the sense of plurality of region, but to the ground or to the upground of Science-Geschichte or history of being is a very, very important writings, even to study the turning of the first idea and the second idea. The second is a paper of Peter van Inwagen, 1995, on meta-ontology, recovering the thesis of Quine and articulating it. And then there is a sort of explicit claim about Meinungianism as meta-ontology. Okay? So in my view, even reprojecting, the retro-projecting the neo-Meinungianism on Meinungianism already by Meinung, we have, or even in the debate of non-existent object by Twardowski, Meinung, Husserl, Brentano, we have a sort of implicit meta-ontology, and what is most useful is a non-metaphysical, pure descriptive way. What is must be the first step for a meta-ontology. Then in order to make a step forward, in order to make of this descriptive meta-ontology something constructive what? Not the structure of the world, not the metaphysics, but model able to individuate something other as a single about form instantiating in space-time or in a metric of a space-time is another kind of discourse. What do I say?
What's the name of that paper?
Huh?
What's the name of that paper in this question?
The 1925.
I don't know, I go by my mind. This is Peter van Inwagen. This is one of the most famous metaphysicians on Quine's meta-ontology or doing meta-ontology with Quine, something like that. Can search. If you take Van Inwagen on meta-ontology, you find the paper online. Yes.
So at one point today you said that
when you referenced or mentioned Saul Kripke,
naming and necessity.
at some point you said that we stop being afraid of things after we name them.
We
stop being afraid of things when
we begin to stop being afraid, yeah.
Afraid of things after we have named them.
Yeah.
So my question is
not afraid of things, disoriented in the world of things by naming. or afraid of something by naming it. Not only things, feelings, expectation, yeah.
So I have mainly two questions as regards that statement. First, is that really the case? Does our disorientation stop after we have named it? For example, I think of Shakespeare here, where he says, "What is in the name? A rose with another name, but smell just as sweet." And then Nietzsche also says in Hugo right under Luger, what is reality? Army of metaphors and metonyms. So does it really go away, our disorientation, just because now we have recognized or now we have a grasp, okay, that is the thing. So that would be the first question. Second would be, what happens when we have the problem, we have a name for it, but then we have developed several other names for it. For example, when we speak of Dalit, also untouchables in India, then there's a barrage of names for them. For example, we call them Dalits, untouchables, depressed classes, Harijan, I don't know what else.
Paria.
Huh?
Paria?
Sorry?
Paria? No.
But no.
Okay.
So what happened? Does the disorientation really go away? One, and two, when we have so many names, what does that say about the necessity of naming itself?
Okay. The problem is the need of naming and what the naming or labeling gives to you. Of course, it don't avoid our disorientation against the reality or every changing phenomenal world, but also give a sort of correspondence between our mind and the things. It can be unadapted, but it's already something more as to be mute against the changing world of phenomena. So I wonder that the world stops to be uncertain for us by naming or labeling things. But it's the first step in order to establish frames, or as be considered as the first step in order to establish a frame or correspondence between representation and think, and then between concept and the representation. Okay? It's already established. Then there are animal pattern that comes before and develops parallelly, like touching, like smelling, and so on and so on. But at the threshold between the animal and the human and the epistemical still always remain a language act, naming and labeling, though indicating by labeling. Okay, you can also make a sign, okay, as a catalog, but anyway provides an elemental pattern of things. It doesn't stop the uncertainty, it doesn't stop, but they give a pattern, local one, correspondences, equivocities if it happens, or plurivocity when it happens. But when we have plurivocities, or equivocal names, still have a more rich situation as the mute things, like for example in psychoanalysis. Okay? So if you can name something in 3 different ways or the 7 different ways, then the question is how the way let us reach the aboutness of the thing. But one thing is equivocity of something or acception of something. One thing is the muteness against it something itself, you know. That's another thing. This is just another step. So if equivocity still appears in everyday life, still appears in science, and we have to reduce equivocity in order to stabilize our experience of things. But there is cannot expressing something and then to remain mute. What is the situation of the mystical by returning to our yesterday Wittgenstein discourse. So naming, and not by chance, the first paragraph of the philosophical investigation of Wittgenstein about language and things, plays of language, they are not irreducible, they remains not reducible to this great mirror, because the great mirror is broken, as Wittgenstein himself says, begins by indicating and naming, the analysis of Augustinus de Magistro. So that's I will avoid such first step of framing the world by naming and labeling. And then I say I add from a sort of abstract representation. So the stability of our world begins not, now we know, with naming and language, becomes even before speaking or before sounding, with the relationship with the mother or with the body of the mother. So the stabilization, I think, on the Winnicott transitory object by Winnicott in the child psychology. So stabilization is a long, complex process, but it's sure that to reach the predicative level of labeling and naming is a sort of breaks on the anti-predicative and begins to give a clear and shareable structure of the world. We share the world in a way when we can say that's not what you name, this is something other, and so on and so on. So equivocity begins to the second phase when the play of stabilization already took place. Yeah?
So basically, complexity system, or the theory of complexity, the way I understand it, is basically an attempt to find order in things which at first appear disorderly. So when we do that, when we apply that to a political system, we're trying to find order within basically citizens and the way citizens vote. I know I can ask this question after the last two lectures, but like I was having this inquiry, so like is it okay if I continue?
This is not, no, just a moment, I will just clarify. This is not putting order when there is disorder.
It's an attempt to find
patterns.
Yes.
In the radical relativization of order and chaos as absolute entities. So it's to watch and to identify and to handle with behaviors of system that contains as well order and chaotic phases, and not just a linear behavior predetermined from the beginning. So another thing. So I don't put order in the chaos.
Can I say that, like within complexity system, there's a tendency that to universalize certain rules and certain models in order to understand that particular system. Tendency to universalize.
This is a universalist. Universalize is a.
Universalize, yes.
It depends from which, from how you depend already from absolutes. There is many issues not becoming from complexity sciences, but becoming from this random reflection on complexity with no tools, what we will avoid at most, that universalize a bit too quick, in my view, and then made that's anticipating to strong rationalists or even to decision maker. So there are people talking about the ontology of becoming as complex word. Other people come about complexity as a diffuse property of everything, and so on and so on. There are holistic steps that philosophy must refute, because we are no longer able to claim that. So there is sort of in order to pursue this stabilization. This is always a sort of natural instinct and then pursued by rationality to stabilize. And then the universalization is a sort of legal process when it is made by science. Okay, I have a fall, I have a case, I variate the case, I apply the same law I have abstracted to other cases, I prove it, and so on and so on. And then when for every case I watch that, for every possible variation I watch that is the case, then the law is valid. Then there is other forms that are rhetorical form of universalization. For example, that is metonymical forms. Metonymy is take the parts from the whole. I watch that something is complex, then everything is complex. That's rhetoric. We need of rhetoric, is useful, but anyway, it's a jump forwards, but it is not rationally consistent. And many forms of universalization, you're right, of complexity belongs to this form. Because in my view, they are not needed in the, with the tools of philosophy. There are two very, very precise, independently from being continental, analytical, or post-continental and post-analytical at the same time. So the rigor of philosophy avoids such rhetorical jump, what is very useful, very. So we find the quantum process somewhere the world is quantum. We find complexity somewhere, there's in some phenomena, everything is complex. You know, that gives a sort of general horizon, but there's a sort of fake. Yeah.
I think one problem that arises, particularly when complexity system is used to analyze a political system, is that in complexity system there's a tendency to move from the individualistic to the holistic, right? But within a political system, and this is happening because there are more discussions about political epistemology, where it is suggested that there's a need to move from the discussions about the state or the civil society to the individual, and we need to talk about political rationality on part of the citizens, right? So I was very curious, like, especially during this application of complexity system to understand a political system, there is a shift from, as I said, from individualistic to holistic, but in political epistemology, it's the reverse that is required, to move from the whole to the individual. So how would, like...
I don't really understand the question. That is, the problem is not to go to the single, to element, to the whole, to the whole, or to the whole, to the single, but it's to be able to shift without making mistakes. That is what a map serves. It's not just the problem is not an epistemological hypostasis. The wholes becomes first, and the elements then derives and becomes first the elements. That is. For a system become first the whole, because we have an autonomic constraint of the system itself. But anyway, not everything proceeds in this way. So the problem is, the need is to know how to shift mereologically from the parts to the whole and the whole to the parts without missing the nature of the thing. This is what they call as a general grammar and the usefulness of a mapping. So when we map rigorously and methodologically, as we will see tomorrow, a complex system, when we are able to map a complex system and then to ascribe in this methodological image all the issues, epistemic issues that can help us to describe locally that or that phenomenon, then the usefulness is to shift from one context belonging to the complex to another without losing the specificity, not to claim once for all mereological presupposition, that is, the whole becomes from the parts, or the parts become from the whole, that is, the universal becomes to the particular, or the particular becomes to the universal, you know? There's another situation of knowledge. For this reason, all people underestimate the maps, but descriptive and build the maps is a very, very special technique that is useful for many things that comes after. No, not for this reason, but we will say it's more in detail tomorrow. The last question was just a mapping. The problem is not mapping, it was just. I reduce the mapping to a just. Of course, after the mapping, there is exploration or conquest. But anyway, mapping is not just sort of plain cartography, and we will say this is not a cartography at all, it's more articulated as it. But please, in post-metaphysical approach, please don't underestimate the mapping. For a construction of rationality, of course, not for global views. Okay?
Small question.
Yeah.
How do you view a complicated system and complexity system? Are both same or different?
Many thanks for the question. No. Complicated, the complex is not just complicated. Complex entails process that change while I'm approaching its complicated nature. That is because we need complex and not complicated. For example, a computer machine is very complicated to know, but it's not complex. It's a machine, it's complicated. If I have to study a satellite, it's very complicated mechanism, it is not complex. A living cell is complex because it's complicated, but let emerge processes that are not already in whole, contained in the first state of its instantiation. Okay? I can take the complicated, and the rate of complicated remains always the same. Okay? I cannot take the complex, but while presupposing that it remains so complicated at every stage of its behavior. Even a watch is complicated, but it's not complex. But it is not bifurcate, it follow one logic and let not emerge new patterns and so on and so on. So when I start to study watch, I stop and I restart to study the watch in 10 years, the watch remains the same, and this rate of complication remains the same. I can't do that with the complex. Five o'clock. Okay.
Any more questions?
No. Maybe summing the today and the tomorrow lesson will be more questions because we will fulfill our ontological approach and then switch to policy making approaches. Okay.
Tomorrow we meet here 2 p.m.
Thank you.